I'm Glyn from MrGlyns Pickups, and today I'm going to have a chat with Rod Kappa from Rod Kappa Guitars, based just outside Auckland. Now, Rod has been making classical guitars for 35 years. He's got to have stuff to say. I'm really interested in particular to discuss the difference between, or the conflict between, tradition and innovation. Anyway, I'd love you to subscribe. You can do that below. It won't hurt a bit. Thank you. Hi Rod, how are you doing? Really nice to talk
Glyn.
to you.
Yeah, good.
So what have you got on the go at the moment?
Well, I've been working on some jigs and things recently, and I've just started a couple of guitars, a prelude guitar and a concert guitar. I'm putting the struts on the back up there. Yeah, I'm taking it easy at the moment. I've had a break over Christmas and that, so that's been good. But I'm ready to get back into it now. Yeah, I miss building. I enjoy building.
So that looks like a side bending jig behind you.
It's a side bending jig. Yeah.
How are you heating that?
I'm waiting for the stuff to come in. It's a silicone heating blanket and a couple of sheets of steel. You know, well, you probably know the routine. Sandwich it all, heat it up, and then clamp it down, and then pull these spring levers over to the side. Pull the sides down. Yeah, and then leave it, let it cook for a bit. Turn it off, cool it down, and hope it looks like a guitar side.
So
one piece instead of two.
So those the heating blankets, is that a new thing with you?
It is with me. I've always bent sides by hand on a hot pipe.
Right.
But it's hot work, and it's laborious work. I don't mind doing it, but I just thought I needed something different to do, and it's a way of making the sides constantly accurate rather than guiding it by hand and hoping you've got the bends right and all that. I mean, it's long-winded to do it by hand, but you know. Plus, I think it keeps the sides flatter because you're sandwiching them. Whereas you can tend to, with certain woods, you can get a bit of a ripple if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but it's nicer not to have that. So, yeah.
But don't you like that feeling when you've got the hot pipe as it?
Oh yeah. Oh, it's good. Yeah, I do quite enjoy it actually. I mean, I'm going to try it and see, and if I'm happy with the results, I'll carry on. If not, I'll go back to the old pipe. It's a guitar bending pipe that I made when I built my very first guitar when I was a teenager. And fortunately, when I got back from overseas, my parents hadn't thrown that away, so I'm still using it. It's got a 1,000 watt. I better not say anything. I shall have a go if I do.
Yeah.
It's got a 1,000 watt heater element in it. And I use a stovetop rheostat to control the power going through it.
Could be worse. It could be the blowtorch version. No, I've seen.
Well, that's probably not. Actually, that's another issue. I nearly set the kitchen on fire the other day, melting some wax. So I'd rather avoid flames. Yeah.
That's living your art. That is, isn't it?
Hey, living your art, all right.
Yeah.
I nearly wasn't alive because of my heart, let alone art.
So how did you get into making classical guitars?
Well, I started playing guitar when I was back in '64 probably. I was trying to analyze the date just before I got online. About '64 I went and had lessons, and I learnt flamenco originally, then I learnt classical, and I've always been practical. I've always built model aeroplanes and repaired cars and that right from when I was a kid, because my father was always repairing cars, so I was helping him. So I was always doing things with my hands, and I thought, oh, I'm going to build a guitar. So I did a copy of the one I had at the time, and then I ended up going over to Spain, tried to get a job there, but they didn't want to. At that time, the Japanese and people had been through through Spain, and they'd pinched a lot of their ideas. So the builders in Spain were weary about taking on foreigners, so they wouldn't have me in to help as an apprentice. So I carried on learning to play guitar, and I built a balalaika. I went to London, late '60s. I ended up in London I built a bass balalaika for someone who was playing in the London Balalaika Orchestra of all things, and really that was the only instrument I'd built up until I started again late 90s, when I had a guitar from Spain which I wasn't overly happy with. So I thought, well, I'm at a stage where I can get the tools, I can build another guitar. So I decided to build a guitar, and it carried on from there. People played it and they said, well, you can't stop, you know, you've got to carry on building. It was something I always wanted to do, so, you know, eventually it came about, which was, it's good in a way, because I think because I couldn't work, I didn't get the training in Spain under traditional makers. I didn't get brainwashed into a certain pattern of thought, so I could use my own ideas and really start fresh. I mean, obviously some things you follow that other makers do, you know, there's different techniques, but the actual overall design of the guitar, I sort of sussed out what I wanted to do, and, you know, sometimes that's better rather than being trapped in a tradition as such. Although I like the sound of the traditional Spanish guitar, and that's what I've always tried to emulate. Of course, with makers, certainly classical guitars, the thing has always been the volume of the guitar, you know, their sound output, and that's something that makers have always tried to increase. But there's a limit where you get to where you can get the volume okay, but you lose all that Spanish sound, that tone, and those overtones that you get with a good Spanish guitar. So, you know, it was a balancing act. Change technique, change structure, make it louder, but without killing the overall tone and sound of the guitar.
Did you make it louder?
Well, I've recently gone on to. I've avoided a lot of things when I've been building. One was an adjustable neck, and the other one was a lattice brace top. I always thought that an adjustable neck, because the neck isn't attached to the body, you're going to lose energy.
So, sorry, we're not talking truss rod here.
No, this whole neck swings.
Could you hold that right
in here?
Could you hold that in the middle of the screen so we can have a little? So
if you look at the neck, there's a gap around the outside of it.
Right.
I don't know whether you can see that on there.
Really, but describe it.
So the neck is totally detached from the body. The only thing that keeps the neck in place is the tension of the strings. It's got a very thick hinge in here, which a wooden, good solid hardwood hinge, and an adjustable Allen screw in here, which bears down on a steel plate inside. But it's very solid in here. It has to be very heavy to take the strain of the neck without moving. So I always thought anything that, if the neck's not attached to the body, you're likely to be losing energy, and I've always avoided doing it. But eventually I decided to try it, and it worked. So
what you've got there is you can set your bridge height to what you want the bridge height to be.
Leave that where it is.
And you can set the action to what you want it to be.
Exactly.
Rather than one of them compromise.
You can have a flamenco action, or you can have a classical action. So it's a bit low now. So if you raised it, you'd have a much richer sound without the flamenco buzz. So the benefit of it is, I've found, getting a bit older and my hands are getting a bit weaker than they were, that you can practice on a low action and learn music which you are going over and over and over without wrecking your hands with the action low. Then when you come to perform it or whatever, you can raise the action and get rid of the buzzing. And
brilliant.
Yeah, so it's got some benefits.
Because it's always hard for me when I, as a guitar repairer, setting up the action because a lot of classical players will want 4 or 5 mil action.
Well, yeah, some do. The good players do. The other ones want 2 millimeters. So you're always fiddling around.
Yeah, and people will say, "Oh, I've just bought this guitar, and the action's really high." And you look at it and you go, "Well, yeah, not really, not for everyone." But
no, well, average classical height they say is around 3. The 12th fret is around 3 on the first string and say 4 on the 6th. That's sort of middle road average height. But I've had a few recently that said, "Oh, I want it down so it's almost touching," and you say, "Well, you can't, because unless you've got a perfect neck, like on some other, maybe some factory bought guitar. Unless you've got a perfect neck, you can't do that because your notes aren't going to be there. But anyway, I mean that's one reason why I decided to do the adjustable, because I was getting people coming back each year. Oh, my action's too high now. Can you lower it? Or now it's too low. Can you raise it? And I thought the answer is adjustable neck. They can get a key. You can actually tune it, do it while you're playing. It's that easy, you know. So
Really?
yeah, you can get someone to adjust it while you're playing, and then you say, yeah, that's right, leave it there. So it's worked. And the thing is, it actually improved the sound of the guitar, because what it did, because of the strength that I had to have in the neck area, it increased the weight of the instrument, and that increased the projection, because the instrument doesn't move, it pushes the sound out without the guitar moving.
Okay.
A very light guitar generally doesn't have a lot of projection. It surrounds the player with sound, but because, well, there's a lot of reasons why. A soft back and sides will allow the sound to escape out of the back and sides, obviously, but it lacks the projection. And I think the only thing another reason why I can think that would because the weight of the instrument, because it's light, it's very minusculely. You could probably measure it, but you don't feel it. The guitar will move with the vibration of the sound. So it's not projecting, it's moving backwards instead of pushing sound forward. I think this is part of it, because the chap that was down here over the weekend, he's just got one of my guitars, and he said it's interesting. He said I can play things on yours that I couldn't play on my light guitar because the guitar seemed to not be in place when I wanted the notes because it was too light. So that's interesting,
Isn't it?
yeah. So it's got a double whammy. So increasing the weight increased the sound, it improved the sound, which I was surprised actually.
But that weight's only in that sort of neck body joint
It's
area.
in the neck. Well, being there, of course, it's stopping the transfer of energy through from the neck too. It kills that ability for the vibrations to get lost in that circle. So it keeps the neck very rigid. The neck can't move because it's very solid in that area, and all the string energy is transmitted to the top instead of flapping the neck.
No, but the string is anchored at two ends. When you're playing it, the fret through the fret, there must be some energy going into the.
It goes into the neck, but the neck can't move. So that's as far as it gets. Well, I glue the frets in. I don't.
Yeah.
Some makers just hammer the frets in into the wood. I actually glue them in as well as hammer them in. So that locks, and all these things they're all minuscule, but they all add to the overall effect.
So with that, then, does changing the material that the neck is made of, does that make any difference?
Yes, it probably does. I have a very stiff. There's a very stiff neck, not my neck here, but the neck here. It's very stiff because I actually construct the fingerboard as well. It's not one piece of wood. I make the fingerboards with a hardwood core surrounded by ebony, epoxied together, and that fingerboard is very stiff. So if you have a soft wood in the neck, the fingerboard actually stiffens it up.
Yeah.
And when I set the neck, I make it very flat when I first make it, and then after putting the frets in and everything, I bend the neck to get have a slight relief in the neck. I bend that in and heat it so it sets the neck in that position. So the neck's always trying to straighten itself. So you're pulling against the tension of the string as well. But I think the main thing that gives you that added energy in the top is the fact that the neck is not moving. The other thing that affects that quite often is adding weight to the head. An earlier guitar I had, a Yamaha, I put lead weights drilled into the head, and that improved the sustain and everything in the instrument. But I've tried doing it on mine, and it doesn't make any difference. So I'm figuring that the neck is where it should be, just heavy and as stiff as it should be.
There was a thing you used to be able to get, which for electric guitars, that looked like a little clamp that you'd screw to the headstock.
Right.
And I remember a mate of mine who's a brilliant player, but him saying, "Yeah, you can hear the difference on your Strat." And I thought, yeah, right, but you could.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Again, it depends on the stiffness and what wood you use. But having said that, I use on my Prelude guitars, I use the concert guitars are mahogany at the moment. I've used Matai. Matai is a good stiff strong wood, quite heavy. But on my preludes, I use Monterey cypress, or macrocarpa as we call it here, but it's actually Monterey cypress, and that works fine. But I think it's partly because the fingerboard is very stiff to start with, and that eliminates the need to put a stiffening rod in or anything like a lot of makers do. I decided to experiment with that because in the early days I used to get the odd one back with a bent neck, and I thought, well, let's see what we can do to make the whole setup stronger. So I worked on that.
I suppose if you're making that fingerboard out of more than one piece and they're epoxy together, then heat isn't going to be relevant. So you can,
and that was a byproduct that with a lot of ebony fingerboards, they shrink and expand, and you get the frets sticking out and all that. It doesn't affect it. The weather doesn't affect it the same because it's enclosed basically in a sheath of epoxy. You've only got half of the wood exposed. Plus, I seal the fingerboard I wax it too, and that seals it and stops the moisture getting in.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think sealing it is. Yeah,
I think so. I know traditionally they don't, but you're supposed to oil them and that. But I think just sealing it with wax, that gets rid of it all. In fact, one guitar that I built just before Christmas, I was commissioned to do a fretless guitar.
Okay.
That was a new one, so I tossed it up for a while and thought, yeah, okay, I'll build it. So I went ahead and did it, and it worked out well. But to make the fingerboard right, I had to. The player was he was used to a fretted guitar, so what I had to do was put markings in where the frets were. So I cut slots and put white cardboard in, so it marked all the frets. Then I coated the whole thing with super glue, a few coats of super glue, and then flattened it right down. And it was good, it worked well, but he had it for about 2 weeks, and I get a phone call. Ron, you're not going to like this. So he wanted frets put in it, so I put frets in it. The fingerboard stayed super glued. The finish was super glue, so it was still a very smooth, good fingerboard. So my thoughts on not sealing fingerboards have changed a bit now. Yeah. I don't know that I'd super glue all of them, but it certainly didn't have any harmful effects.
No, well, it's a thin, hard coating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The fingerboard won't wear out as quickly if you do a lot of playing on it. Like a lot of them get scored, don't they? Especially flamenco players, their fingerboards get wrecked. So it'd probably stop that happening. Yeah.
Bound to.
Yeah.
So what do you make tops? Oh, sorry. Another question I thought before. So you're talking about all this innovation, but I noticed one of your models is called a Torres.
I built a couple of Torres in the style of Torres, yes.
Right. So
and Louis Panormo too. I did 2 of each for a concert that a friend of mine did in an old stately home that was built in 1864, I think, and it was Alberton actually, and he wanted to do duets with a friend of his, so I built 2 instruments. He bought one and I kept the other one. I've sold them all now; they're all gone. So, but for years I never had any orders for them, so I built them, keeping them, thinking people will see them and order them, but never happened. But that's life.
Yeah.
But the Torres, the guy who bought the Torres, he's wrapped with it because it's hard to describe the sound, but it's built very lightly again, but it's got a very full, almost overly full sound. It's different because they had different strings in those days too. So you put high, the nylon strings or fluorocarbon that we use now in strings on an older style guitar, it's different to what they would have heard in those days. So it's a bit hard to know whether the guitar style that they were building is right for the modern strings and things that we use now. But anyway, interesting experiments. Yeah.
So what would you use for tops?
Mainly cedar, but because spruce is hard to get here, I have to import it from England or wherever. Usually when I visit England, I come back with a suitcase full of spruce. I've got a few tops left. Cedar's easy to get. I just go up the road to Silverdale and go into Herman Pacific or whatever it is up there, and they've got a big warehouse full of cedar. The other wood I use is Sequoia.
Right.
redwood, Californian redwood.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's one. This one's a Sequoia top. That's Sequoia, very dark. Sound is very similar to a cross between cedar and spruce.
Okay.
But again, it's not used very much out here. It's probably quite hard to get. I happened to come across a couple of planks that were being used by a piano repairer down in Devonport, and he said they were spruce, but they're not spruce. They're redwood.
Right. I imagine lower down on the tree it to be pretty strong. I mean,
Well, providing the grain's close, yes, it's good.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine. I've no idea where these came from, but I'm assuming North America. That's usually where the Sequoia is.
there's a couple in Cornwall Park to keep an eye on, mate.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It gets a bit windy, you know.
Well, the funny thing was that they cut one down at Alberton House, and I've got a slab of that which I'm going to use for decoration or something at some stage. I've had it there for a while. It's about time I cut it up and did something with it.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. It was falling down. It was rotting. So that had been there 100 and what's that? About nearly 150 years, more than 150 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what about top bracing?
Well, yeah, I've sort of experimented a lot with top bracing, and more or less I've gone in a circle. My original guitars that I built in the 90s were semi-fan strutted, more like fishtail strutting actually. They were different to fan, but had a similarity to fan, and that worked okay. And I sort of carried on with that, and I ended up about probably 10 years ago or 8 years ago with a diamond strut, a double diamond pattern, which also worked well.
Okay.
And then I carried on with that and ended up back with fan strutting, but double. Most fan strutting, the typical Torres type strutting, is fan here and diagonals across here, or no diagonals.
Could you hold that up?
Sorry.
Yeah, cheers.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah, because it's up there. Can I tilt that a bit? Can I tilt that?
Yeah. You got to try and keep it in the middle, but
Is that better?
if you hold it back, yeah, that right there, that
Right.
looks good.
Normal fan strutting is a fan and that maybe seven fans and a diagonal across the bottom.
Is that with a bridge plate as well?
Some of them have bridge plate. Torres didn't usually have a bridge plate, no, but I tend to put something in there now. I quite often I put a strut across there, a light strut, just to support the shape. With a diagonal, you have the fan strut with diagonal at the bottom. But what I've done, I've put a fan strut in, but a shorter one in the middle, and another little diagonal across here. So it makes the centre part more treble prone. It's shorter, the lengths are shorter, so you bring the treble up, but the bass will react with the outer part. That was a thought. Whether that's, I mean, it's hard to know where sound goes when you pluck a string. Yeah. You know, I hear a lot of people talk about, you use the struts, sound travels down the struts. I don't believe that. The top will move according to the frequency. It will either move in the centre, further out, or at the outside. The trebles tend to come from this area. Yeah. And so that's what I did, and that seemed to work. I thinned the top out in that area too. I made the top quite thin, whereas traditionally it's the outer parts you thin.
Yeah.
But I went for the centre, and that helped the treble in the mid-range. What
made you think of that?
Well, another maker had been doing that. I saw the thicknesses of his tops. A maker by the name of Daniel Friedrich in France, from Paris. And I had his is one of the better recognised guitars in the world, and I liked I played a couple of his guitars that somebody had out here, and liked the sound. It was quite a robust sound, especially the treble area, and so I thought, well, he's doing something right. So I thought, well, I'll give that a go, and I did, and it seems to have worked. And then I went recently again the same thought pattern as the neck. I was never 100% happy with the sound of a lot of the lattice, the crisscross, the lattice braced guitars that are around. It tends to kill the upper treble area and those harmonics that you need with a Spanish sound. But I thought, well, I'll give it a go. So I kept the same thinness in the middle, and I only did the lattice structure in the center of the soundboard and left the fans on the outside, and the sound improved. It increased the volume, retained the tones and everything I wanted to hear. So that's what I'm doing now. That's what this is. That's what I'm doing, and it's working.
So that lattice, does that keep the would you say the center part is kept fairly rigid?
Well,
Like a plate almost.
it's not a. I don't. My lattice is. I've got. Can I show? Can I get one for you?
Yeah,
Just here. I'll show you what it is. Got two of them here. I'll just pull one out. That's basically what I put in there.
Oh, it's quite big.
Yeah, well, that covers the. I'll hold the guitar up. That covers the center part of the guitar. It's big. They're not tight lattices. I don't want too much control in that area. I've got the trebles have got to come out. So that's there, and I have fan. I'm not sure whether that's the right way up. I think that's the right way up. And then I have a fan down each side to allow for the top to move in a more traditional Spanish way. Seems to work. Sounds good. So I'm sticking with that at the moment.
Yeah, right.
I don't put a plate under that. I put under the fan strutted one I was talking about earlier. I do put a strut across the middle there, but I don't with this. It doesn't seem to need it. The top stays, pretty straight. They are domed, my top, so that makes them stronger too.
Yeah. I was just thinking that because, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's your bridge.
Yep.
You don't want it to do that so much because that's pretty. You don't want to do that.
No, because
pumping is what you.
That lateral, that flipping backwards and forwards motion. One movement there tends to cancel another movement here, and vice versa. So if that's all it does, no, you obviously get a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But it's the up and down movement. Plus the fact that the strings on these are higher. You see, I've got a raised fingerboard there. Is that visible?
Yes, it is. It is quite.
And that means the strings are coming more at an angle like that than flat, and that also has a better effect on the top.
Yeah.
Of up and down movement.
Wow. How much influence do back and sides have in your mind?
I think quite a bit. If you laminate back and sides like some do, you lose those overtones from that wood.
Yeah.
It might increase the output of that fundamental note, but you've lost a lot of the nature of a guitar, I think. From what I've heard, I mean, I've listened to a lot of instruments. Some people like that. They like a good, loud, fundamental note. If they, for whatever reason, personal reasons. So everyone's ear is different. It's hard to say one thing's right or wrong. It's choice.
Yeah. And you'll want a different guitar for a different application.
And you might want it for a different application. Exactly. Yeah.
Why we all need so many guitars.
See, this one's actually got a pickup in it, so it can be plugged into an amp. Well, the funny thing is that I've found over the years is that a good sounding acoustic guitar very rarely makes the best electric amplified guitar, because you get too much feedback. If it's too sensitive, you get feedback. Whereas quite often a dead sounding natural acoustic instrument amplifies well because it doesn't have any of that feedback issues. Yeah. So it's a funny dichotomy that.
So what pickups do you prefer?
These are just, I think they're Seducer, I think they're called. Just a basic one. Seems to work. It's just a piezo under the saddle.
I suppose if you can have a reasonably high saddle and control your saddle height, because I always think under saddle's not that great on classical. Often there isn't enough downforce, but no, I can see it working on that.
I don't know whether you can see that the saddle's got it's got scallops in it.
Yeah.
I do that underneath as well, so that each string has a point of contact. That way, if there's any high spots or low spots, they tend to even out because that string point pushes down harder. So it's not as stiff as a solid bar. They're 3 mil saddles, so they're quite strong. So I do that just to allow the strings to make sure they're bottoming on the bottom of the saddle slot.
And bone?
They're bone, yeah. I made the Panormos. I used carbon fibre because Panormo had a one-piece bridge with a black raised part of the ebony in the front as the saddle. So I've just put a carbon fibre saddle in there, so it looks right, but it's a more modern approach, separate saddle.
It's fascinating this innovation where I coming from the UK, when I came here, it was immediately obvious that people were doing things differently, that there was less strict observance to tradition because that's always been done. And it's more like, we can do it this way. And at first I was a little resistant to that, but not at all now.
Well, that's where changes happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
And positive and negative, but that's the way it is. Yeah. It was funny though, when I was in UK 2 years ago, I left a guitar there to be sold, and they asked me, "Oh, it's not a lattice, is it?" And I thought, that's interesting. It wasn't actually. It was a fan strut one. That was interesting. I mean, I don't if it's lattice or not lattice. If it sounds good, I don't care. Like when I'm playing an instrument, I just want a guitar that I'm enjoying playing. That's the thing. If it's lattice, that's fine. If it works. So it was funny though. There was obviously that feeling. Oh, lattice. Oh no, that Oh.
Yeah, that weird thing the Southern Hemisphere kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fascinating, isn't it? That's really. Thank you very much for showing us the insides of them. That's
all right. I wish I had a guitar and parts so I could show you the total insides. But anyway, that's another thing. Well, you got some photos there anyway, so.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I'm just trying to figure out what's happening in there and why that would sound better. But and with the neck as well.
Yeah. Well, of course, you've got to make sure you don't have any residual movement in the neck. Well, I mean, the string pulls about 60 or 70 Ks, somewhere in that region. So it's quite a bit of energy coming into that neck. And providing you've got a good strong, what I've got in there is a hardwood flat, about 9mm deep pivot point, and a slot in the neck that goes over that, and that's where the hinge is. So it's quite solid. And the slot in the neck is lined with a hardwood as well, because the mahogany's medium hard, but it's not very hard. So I use an ebony or black miry or something like that in there as a very hard bearing surface. And I lubricate it with a bit of lanolin too. So it, So when you adjust it, it doesn't creak and make noises.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is, as you know, with instruments, if a player's not happy with an instrument, he's not going to practice and he's not going to play. So. And
that can be something as simple as, I mean, in the electric guitar world, it can be as simple as what color it is.
Well, that's true too.
If you don't, you need to look at the guitar and desire it. Otherwise,
that's true. Yeah. Well, you've got to have a fairly good-looking instrument as well. And that's something that I'd always been around music since I was a kid because my mother was a piano teacher. But so I got into hearing music and knowing the sounds was one thing, but getting into designing a good-looking article is another thing. And I did photography for quite a while, about 35 years ago, and that taught me to look as well. So you try and combine those things. It's funny how life adds these things to your character and to the things that you do, and has an effect on another level when you're doing something like lutherie.
Yeah. All experience is useful, isn't it?
All experience adds up. Yeah, that's why in a way I was pleased that I didn't get into guitar making full time when I was very young, because I wouldn't have had the chance to go through all these other experiences. And I think it does. It shapes what you do.
Yeah. I love that that sort of scientific experimentation that you do. That you have an idea. I'll just make it.
Yeah, I do. I think it's building instruments. I think is a combination of science, art, intuition a lot of the time. And of course, having an ear. If you're a player, then you know what you want out of a sound. So that has an effect as well. Yeah, it all adds up. I don't rely totally on science though, because I've never heard a good guitar that's been designed totally by science.
Yeah.
It's funny, there was a very good international player out here a few years ago. And I do house concerts at my place from time to time, and he was doing a house concert here, and he had a guitar designed in Spain mathematically, which was a perfect guitar, he told me. But he said, I don't like the neck, so I'm not going to play it. I'll play one of yours in the concert. So that was fine. But he said the makers of this guitar have designed this mathematically to be perfect. And he said, if you listen to it, and he played me some scales, and then he played some chords. And he said the single notes sound good, but the chords don't work. And he said they're modifying it now to make the chords work. So I said, hang on, this is a perfect instrument that you're modifying to make it work. I said, that's what luthiers do. I said, we don't necessarily start off with a mathematically perfect instrument, or we think is mathematical. But I said, we have a design that works and we improve it. It's the same thing. So nothing's perfect. And you can't, two makers can get the same wood, same tools, the same plans, do everything the same glue, same varnish, build two guitars, one each, which will look identical or virtually. They'll both sound like chalk and cheese. So there's something more than just what you're doing. It's who's doing it. It's a method of gluing something. Who knows? The way you hold your... Yeah. Who knows? But it's interesting.
I read this lovely article once about the Torres design, and it was saying about the curves, and you have this curve with this radius, and that centers there, and then another curve is centered there, and it comes out complicated about all this geometry.
Golden ratios, yeah.
And the article ended with a quote from Torres, because he was asked, where did you get this shape from? And he said, I based it on a pretty girl I once saw in Seville.
Well, that's what the thought is, that the shape of the body of a guitar is a woman's body. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We always call them she.
Oh, yeah.
And they break marriages up too. I've had that. Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah, funny. But well, I mean, nothing is. I mean, as soon as you start using materials like wood, which are grown in nature, every piece of wood, whether it's from the same tree or not, is going to be slightly different. And that's, I mean, to me, that's the magic of it. You know, you can still build the same instrument, but end up with I say perfect, there's no such thing, but a nearer perfect matchup of the woods you're using, and the guitar's brilliant. And you can use the same wood from the same tree, and the guitar's okay, but not as brilliant as that one. It's, who knows? So science comes up into it to a limit, but then other things take over.
Yeah, I think it is such a complicated system.
It is, and there's a saying, and you've probably heard it, that if you don't leave anything to chance, chance leaves nothing to you.
Right.
I like that saying.
Yeah, I'll remember that. Well, Rod, thank you very much for your insight. I'm going to go away and have a really good think about some of this stuff. Really
good. Been good, Glyn. It's really been good.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks very much, mate.
All right, thank you.